You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Tsakalos and Satch Purcell. Our guest today is James Tsakalos. James Tsakalos is an internationally acclaimed NLP trainer and innovator who has been busy exploring, teaching, and pushing the boundaries of NLP for nearly 20 years. Having personally introduced a number of new and innovative developments in the field of NLP, James is particularly well known for his work as the modeler and developer of spiral somatics, a groundbreaking method of reading the subtle physiological indicators of fundamental values, attitudes, and core beliefs. James will be in Orange County, California in September of 2018 for an 8-day spiral somatics training seminar. James is joining us for this conversation via Zoom from his home in Melbourne, Australia.
All right, so it looks like we are recording a new episode of The Authenticity Show. I'm Carlos Tsakalos and
Satch Purcell.
And we're here virtually connecting with a friend in Melbourne, Australia, named James Tsakalos.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
And nice to see you, Satch, by the way. I've only ever seen your name before this call.
Ah, very good. Well, I do exist, and it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Well, gosh, we've got a couple of hours to talk with you, thank goodness, because we have a hell of a lot of questions for you.
Oh, yeah.
I met you through another James T. James Tripp introduced me to you, thankfully. And everything that he said about you so far has been totally true. He said that you're an amazing guy. He said that you're an expert in the field of NLP and related personal growth topics. And he said you're a wonderful human being and just a stellar trainer who knows how to really delve deeply into the subject and get people to really understand it at a higher level by building a foundation really firmly and securely with them and taking them gradually up the knowledge chain to expert level. So can you tell us a little bit about your school in Melbourne? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, Melbourne's where I do most of my teaching, but I do a little bit of stuff around the world. I'm coming to LA. I'll be in Edinburgh next week. I was in India a couple of weeks ago, but Melbourne's kind of my home base, and this is where I teach NLP. And most of the people that come to learn with me, I know that, for example, you're a therapist, and I know if I go to the UK, there's a lot of people there for whom NLP and therapy kind of go together, and that's not really how I do things. I'm not a therapist. I don't define myself that way. I'm not even someone who kind of does therapy but calls it something different because I don't like the word therapy. It's not my thing. I do a bit of coaching from time to time. I used to do a lot of coaching, but I don't. I'm not a healer, let's say, and this has a lot to do with my background in NLP. I was interested in NLP in the first place because of modeling. Modeling's the thing that really inspired me. It's the thing that I'm very passionate about because I've always been very interested in the limits of what human beings can do and how can we explore those kinds of limits? How can we become capable of things? And so modeling's what drew me to NLP. And then my initial training, because I've learned from lots of people now. I stopped counting once I got over 30, so it's been lots of people.
Wow.
But my initial training was with a gentleman who just passed away last year, my mentor, a guy called Roger Dina, who was an Englishman living in Australia. And he was a really masterful trainer, for which I'm unspeakably grateful. But his market was he didn't come to NLP from a therapy kind of background or anything like that. His previous career, he worked in corporate. He was divisional managing director of a major multinational called Courtaulds, and he ran, kind of that locally here in Australia. And so that was kind of his background. His background was in business. And so when he became an NLP trainer, he was teaching NLP and its applications in the context of business, particularly in the context of large organizations, where you've got to navigate corporate culture and different kinds of personalities and all of this kind of thing. And so that was my kind of my NLP background, because I learned from him. And so I learned NLP not predominantly as a therapeutic kind of thing, but as a way of relating with people and communicating with people and motivating and managing people and sorting out disputes and problem solving and all of that kind of stuff. And so I'd never kind of gotten entrenched in the idea of NLP equals therapy that a lot of people seem to get into. And so my market today is different from both of those things. I don't really have a big corporate background or anything like that, but I am someone who knows small business. And most of the people that come to learn with me are people who are in business for themselves, people who are typically people whose business is their expertise. So I get a lot of people like accountants and mortgage brokers and acupuncturists and chiropractors and osteopaths and people who their expertise is their service, their products, this kind of thing. And I also get a little bit of folks in senior management positions in larger organizations, but that's not the majority of my work. But I don't get rooms full of therapists. That's not really my thing. So when I teach NLP, it's predominantly just for people who want to improve themselves, who want to sort out things that have been holding them back, who wants to develop their skills, who wants to be able to relate with people better, who wants to be able to operate at their peak when they need to, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a combination of personal development and professional development, not so much the therapy side of things. So that's the stuff that I teach here in Melbourne. And then at advanced levels, I train modelers, and which is, as far as I'm concerned, really kind of where it's at. Great.
Well, James, I'm kind of curious about how you would go about defining two things, because there are some people who have, are going to be listening to this who don't really understand even what NLP is at a real basic level. So I know there are tons of definitions for that. What's the kind of working definition that you use for NLP for yourself?
Well, I use a few definitions depending on who I'm talking to. So in my basic, I have like an entry-level weekend program. And the way that I usually introduce NLP there is as follows. Imagine that there are 3 or 4 people that all have exactly the same training and exactly the same experience in some kind of skill, whatever that skill is. Of those few people, it's often the case that one of those people just seems to be a freak with regards to that skill. They seem to be blessed. They seem to have some kind of natural talent or natural gift or God-given gift, and they can do that things easier than other people. They picked it up quicker. They perform on a higher level, so that even other people who are good at that skill, when they talk about that person, they go, "Oh, that's that person's whole other. They're just a freak," And usually those people, the thing that allows them to have that degree of skill is stuff that they do that they themselves don't actually know that they do. Because there's most of what we do and most of what we think, most of what we say, most of what we do is outside our conscious attention. We've got very, very little conscious attention. And most of what we do, we're not conscious of. And so this is equally the case of people who are experts in their fields, people who are freaks, people who seem to have these God-given gifts. Most of what they do is stuff that they don't know that they do. And since they don't know that they do it, they can't teach it. And so consequently, people just think that they have some special magical power.
Right.
And so NLP fundamentally is about finding people like that and finding out what it is that they do that they don't know that they do that allows them to have that kind of skill, so that you can take that and you can make it something that's teachable instead of something that seems to be only for the gifted, as it were. That's fundamentally what NLP is about.
Okay.
And
so these freaks or these prodigies, these geniuses, is that relate to what you were referring to as the modeling?
Yeah, because that process is modeling. That's what modeling is. It's about creating explicit, teachable models of implicit or tacit skills, skills that people can't put into words necessarily or don't even know that they have in some cases. Because when you model someone, the result of that is you end up with some kind of process or some kind of procedure or technique or some kind of model for doing something, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got a set of instructions or a body of knowledge about something. And so what has happened historically is people mistake the techniques, the models, the processes for NLP itself. whereas they're really kind of the byproducts. They're the output of the process of modeling. But nonetheless, when people make use of a lot of the things that we've modeled over the years, they will describe that as NLP. And so since that's kind of the convention now, I have another description of NLP, which I think matches both of those kinds of things. And so when people come to train with me at my NLP practitioner training, I will typically define NLP as the detection and subsequent replication and or utilization of patterns in the processes of living systems, most notably human beings. Because it's all about pattern detection and then either making use of those patterns to achieve some kind of an outcome or reproducing the patterns that allow someone else to achieve some kind of outcome.
So it's a form of meta learning in a sense. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. I like that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Satch, I certainly have a ton of questions here too, and I know you do too. So you want to just kind of jump in?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm interested in jumping right into the special topic of this podcast episode. So I actually, Carlos, I think you probably could ask this question better than me, but I think I'm going to do it, which is James. I'm not a neurolinguistic programming expert. I'm not an NLP guy. Of course, I'm around some wonderful people that are. But so for somebody like me, I know that you do this spiral somatics. What is that for a guy with no background in this sort of thing? Please explain what spiral somatics is.
Cool. Well, it's pretty straightforward. So spiral somatics is an in-depth exploration of the link between the mind and the body. So the body and the mind are not separate by any stretch of the imagination. They're just parts of the same system. And most people kind of intuitively recognize this. Most people intuitively recognize that when someone's feeling down, for example, they are often down. Their body kind of droops a little bit, their eyes go down, they're a bit mopey, that kind of thing. And when people are in a really up mood, oftentimes they are visibly up, A lot of people are very familiar with this. You can kind of tell from the sound of someone's voice and the way that they're carrying themselves, the state of mind that they're in, that there's a link that goes that particular way. The link is a two-way link, though, because these are just different parts of the same system. So everything affects everything else. Everything that happens inside you, mentally and emotionally, etc., will affect the way that you're holding and using your body. And everything to do with your body will affect your state as well. You put a lot of caffeine into your system, and that's going to affect your mental state. If you haven't slept very much, that's going to affect your state. If you're holding yourself with lots of muscle tension, that's going to affect your state. If you're really kind of relaxed into a couch, that's going to affect your state. And so most people are aware of the fact that the body and mind are part of the same system. It's just that most people aren't aware of the extent to which that's the case. It's a little bit like, if you'll forgive me, I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but I swear that this is related to your question.
We never do that on the Authenticity Show.
No.
So there's this, and this is very clearly related to spiral somatics as well. This is kind of a key about what spiral somatics is about. Most people will intuitively understand that if I suggest to you, I'm going to guess that you are clearly not the same person today that you were when you were 2 years old. Right? Most people intuitively get that. Most people would agree with that and go, yeah, I'm not the same person today that I was when I was 2 years old. Right? And they get that. Right? But the principle inside of that, by extension, what that means is that you're not the same person today that you were yesterday. You're not the same person today that you were last week or last year or this morning. Right? You're not stuck. You're not fixed in a particular way. You're constantly evolving and changing and growing and learning. And this is the nature of being human. And, a lot of people, they get the idea that I'm not the same person that I was when I was 2 years old, but they kind of don't get the idea that I'm not the same person that I was this morning. They've got this sense that that's somehow different, that that's fixed, and which is not the case. And this is part of what spiral somatics is all about, by the way. But coming back and linking that back now to the body-mind thing, most people are quite aware intuitively that if someone's in a particular kind of emotional state, that's going to be expressed in their body. That's kind of a no-brainer. But everything in your internal experience is expressed in your body by extension. Everything, every aspect of your ongoing internal experience is expressed in your body. That means the opinions that you have about things. That means the thoughts that you're having right now. That means the priorities that you have in this particular moment. That means the kinds of things that you're saying to yourself, the movies that you're running inside your mind. Literally everything that happens inside you is going to be expressed in your body. And spiral somatics is a really kind of in-depth exploration of those kinds of things. It's something that will allow you, once you really kind of learn some of these patterns, it's something that will allow you to recognize the moments that you see someone, while you see someone, and the way that they're holding themselves, the way that they're holding their muscles, the way that they're breathing, the way that their spine is, the way that they're, all of this kind of stuff. You'll be able to make some really good educated guesses as to, for this person, not just what's the state of mind that they're in right now, but what fundamentally is important to them in life, how they're likely to view different kinds of topics, the kinds of people they're likely to surround themselves with, the sorts of things they're likely to be good at, to be naturally inclined towards, the sorts of things that are probably going to be their weaknesses rather than strengths, the kinds of things that are hot button motivators for them, the kinds of things that they don't really care about, the kinds of things that they consider to be common sense. Because common sense is an interesting thing, right? Like people have this idea that some people have common sense and some people don't. But what that really means is, if people think the way that I think, then they are exhibiting common sense, because common sense is the way that I do things,
Right.
And so the things that people, of course, so the things that people to be considered to be common sense, you'll be able to see that as well. You can see quite a lot in someone's body when you know what to look for. And so that's kind of half of the spiral somatics coin. It's recognizing some of these patterns in terms of the links between body and mind.
Could I just pause you for a moment, because I want to interrupt you? That piece makes me curious to know how related is that to, say, empathy, cold reading, facial expressions, things like that. I mean, is that connected to what you're talking about, or not at all?
Facial expressions, not so much. Cold reading, I'm not sure about. I would suspect that probably people that are very skilled at cold reading and do a lot of it will probably over time develop some intuitions about this kind of thing.
Okay.
Empathy is kind of a different ball game, because people define empathy in different ways.
Okay.
A lot of people, empathy is the, I feel for you. I have a feeling for what you're going through and this kind of thing. And oftentimes that's based on just my story of what I think is happening with you,
Mm-hmm.
You're not really, empathizing with another person. You're empathizing with your own story about that person. And for other people, it's a bit different. But all of this is just kind of the surface level stuff, because this link between your body and mind goes two ways. And so, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent again before coming back.
Darn it.
I'm willing to bet that you have, at various times in your life, encountered someone, you may have even experienced this yourself, but encountered someone who believed that there were things that they couldn't do, and used a phrase to express this, like, I'm just not that kind of person. I'm just not the kind of person who can just walk up and talk to someone. I'm just not the kind of person that is good at maths. I'm just not the kind of person who, whatever it might be, I'm just not that kind of person. They've got this sense of themselves as being in a box, as being fixed. This is my sense of who I am. I'm this kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. This is the limits of my identity, the limits of what's possible for me, as it were. And that's a very static, it's a very kind of stuck way of identifying. And spiral somatics fundamentally, by exploring the nature of the link between your body and mind, because a lot of people kind of habitually physically hold themselves in particular ways. You can watch this person through a bunch of different contexts in their life, and they physically have a whole bunch of habitual patterns. And because of the body-mind connection, that means that they are constraining themselves to habitual patterns of thinking, of feeling, of making sense of the world. And so a much deeper element of spiral somatics is using this knowledge of the body-mind connection to be able to free up and develop some flexibility, not just in terms of how you hold yourself and how you move and how you physically are in the world, but in terms of the way that you do the world, in terms of your own beliefs and values and attitudes and this kind of thing. So that instead of I think it was Neil Gaiman a favorite author of mine. I think it was Neil Gaiman. I could be misquoting. I could be quoting someone else and just attributing it to Neil Gaiman here, who once said that one of the worst pieces of advice that people can give you is just be yourself. It's terrible advice, because the idea is that yourself is fixed in some way, right? This is it. Just stay in your box, as it were. And he suggests that that's terrible advice. So don't just be yourself. Be all of yourselves. Be all of your many selves. Be all of the different ways in which your identity, your being, can express itself. Break out of the limitation of this idea that I am this kind of person and I'm not that kind of person. That my identity itself is limited, not just my beliefs, not just my behaviors, but my sense of who I am is in a box. And spiral somatics, to a large extent, is about breaking out of that box and developing the ability, by using this mind-body connection, to develop some fluency and some fluidity in terms of how you relate with the world, how you relate with yourself, how you do life, so that you can be whoever you need to be at any given moment and have a more fluid, responsive identity. So that depending on the context, you can be the right person in this moment right now, and not have to wait around for someone else to be that right person, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. I like that idea of being yourselves, plural.
Yeah, I do
Absolutely.
too. I like that too. James, what this reminds me of as you were talking is the idea that we each have different roles in our lives, right? Like sometimes I have the role of a husband. I'm an uncle. I'm a teacher. I'm an employee. I'm a commuter. I'm a martial artist, whatever it is. And every time I think of one of these roles, I do realize that I really am embodying some slightly different things.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that. Is that similar to what you're talking about, just taken deeper? Or
it is, yeah. And as you think about it, you recognize that you're embodying different kinds of things. And even just right now, moments ago, as you were describing those things, for people who are trained in spiral somatics, they would see that yes, your body is doing things. For each one of those things, you're doing different stuff.
That's great. That's great. That's cool. All right.
Satch, are you hearing some elements of Vipassana training coming back as he's talking about listening to the body and the patterns that come up that you observe?
Definitely I am. You too?
Yeah, well, yes. And what led me, James, into that sort of path of thought was thinking about in speaker training, how one of the first things you do is teach people how to stand and to be still and to stop those self-comforting motions, that kind of like, checking the watch, touching the collar, putting your hands in your pocket, shifting from side to side, and all that stuff that people do as a means for basically petting themselves to make themselves feel good. And if you were to be really still, you can notice the compulsion. And by noticing the compulsion, it brings you back to Vipassana, which is all about observation and noticing those sensations and where the roots come from. So I can imagine how this would be a wonderful way of exploring that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're reminding me of something, because you described, I know that you have learned spiral dynamics.
Yeah.
And there is a link between spiral dynamics and spiral somatics. And
yeah, we should talk about that.
my teacher, who was my mentor, I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do a 5-year full-time apprenticeship with this guy as an NLP trainer. Which was far more valuable than any other learning experience I've ever had. And he's someone who was had great expertise in the field of spiral dynamics. For people who are aware of spiral dynamics, the two guys that kind of came up with it, students of a guy called Claire Graves, Don Beck and Chris Cohen, went their separate ways at one point in time, and so there became kind of two schools of spiral dynamics. And one of those schools, headed by Don Beck, Don Beck was close with my mentor, Roger, and was of the view, I think he expressed the view at a spiral dynamics conference at one point that spending 2 hours with Roger was more valuable than spending 2 days with him, Don Beck.
Wow.
For the purposes of getting this stuff. And he frequently would, every year, he would ask Roger why he hadn't given up on this NLP stuff and taken his offer to come and co-train with him, Don Beck, teaching spiral dynamics around the world. So Roger had great expertise in that particular field. And so I know that because you've learned spiral dynamics and because of the way that you've learned spiral dynamics, you've had a certain experience that I've also had about 40 times, which is a way of going into teaching this stuff where a group of students are typically taken out of a room. The room is then arranged. A culture is created inside that room. And then you come into that room to experience what it's like coming into this kind of culture. So knowing what we know about spiral somatics in terms of these physiological patterns, there's some really interesting things. So this self-comforting stuff that you talk about, I have seen on so many occasions an exercise like that, where a room has been arranged to reflect a certain kind of culture, and everything about it reflects this kind of culture. People get brought into the room, and they'll respond to that in certain ways. Some people will respond with a kind of a relaxing sensation as if they've just come home, right? Like, this is my kind of place, you know. Other people will respond quite differently. So there are certain people who, when faced with a culture that is very controlled and very rule-bound and very secure and very orderly and organized and things like this, there are some people coming into that culture will themselves settle quite comfortably into a way of being that is very controlled, very orderly, very secure, very organized. There's other people, on the other hand, who come into that environment that immediately regress and they become teenagers again. Right? These are like grown people, you know, yeah, in their 40s, in their 50s, who, you know, in business, right? Like people that are, you know, in corporate environments who are running these fucking companies, and they age regress. They become 16 years old again, and they become these rebellious teenagers, and everything about them, like you can just see the age regression that takes place when they go back to this particular way of being. And that's something that often happens. You find yourself in a context that has a certain kind of culture, that has is filled with people who do the world a certain way, is arranged a certain way. Some people will go into an environment that is arranged a certain way, where people do things a certain way, and it just feels comfortable and it feels like home. But others will go into that culture, go into that kind of context, and will not feel at home, will not feel comfortable with that. And they will shift, they will respond to that, and their whole physiology will shift, and they'll shift into a whole different way of being. As a way of kind of responding to that, you know, which in some cases could be a rebellious kind of thing. Which in some cases it could be a, you know, I'm going to be in absolute control of myself kind of thing. In some cases it could be a, you know, who do I need to talk to kind of get people to loosen up around here a little kind of thing. There's any number of different things that people can do in response to that. And I suspect that that's really where I suspect that could be where the whole self-comforting thing takes place. Because if someone said, like, as far as I'm concerned, from a spiral somatics perspective, right? Speaker training, this is fantastic. Tell someone to stand symmetrical and be still. That's going to affect you in certain ways. That's going to reflect certain ways of being in the world. And if that's something that you're very comfortable with, then that will be quite comfortable. And if not, then you're likely to adjust. You're likely to kind of slip into ways of doing things, ways of being in the world that are more comfortable for you, that are more congruent for you in that particular moment in time. And that doesn't mean necessarily that they're self-soothing or anything like that. It just means that you're having a way of being forced upon you and being told this is the right way to do it. You know, so and forgive me if this kind of goes against speaker training principles, but, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if you tell someone that they have to use their body a particular way, this is what you must do as a speaker, that's bullshit. That's just, you're forcing someone into a particular way of being. And then, you know, interpreting anything that's at odds with that way of being as wrong in some way, that they should correct that if you're going to be a speaker, let's say, you know. And I don't think that's particularly healthy. I think what's far more healthy, from my point of view, of course, you know,
common sense.
Yeah, well, common to you and I.
Exactly.
So
Of course.
what I think is a useful kind of thing to do is instead show people how to be congruent, how to be dynamic, how to be engaging as a speaker in a number of different ways of being in the world, rather than going, this is the thing that you have to do, because you end up looking like a robot. Again, I did my apprenticeship with Roger. His market was like senior corporate, right? So most of the people that came to train with Roger were, CEOs and MDs and general managers and national sales and marketing directors and people like that, And so if that's your market, you have to kind of do things a certain way. And I did a 5-year apprenticeship with Roger. And so for several years, the way that I conducted myself as a trainer of NLP was suit and tie, microphones, stage spotlights, the whole kind of shebang. It was all very polished. It was all very professional, all of this kind of thing. I don't do that these days. And most people who have learned with me in the past probably 10 years find it difficult to imagine that was ever the case. But that was a role that I kind of had to play, because that's the context. This is the thing that you have to do. If you're running public programs for people, senior people in large organizations, then you have to kind of convey yourself in a certain way as to match the dominant culture in that particular group of people, But I don't have to do that these days, so I have different kinds of people. And so I've developed a different style, a different kind of approach to training, a different approach to presenting. And that doesn't mean that it's worse. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that I should be doing the suit and tie and stand up there and all that kind of stuff. It just means that if I'm going to be in that kind of environment, if I'm going to go into an environment where people are going to be doing a particular way of doing the world, then I'm going to present in such a way that I am comfortable and fit inside that environment. I can be comfortable pretty much anywhere, because I can be lots of different selves. And so it's just a case of being the correct self, the most useful self for that particular context, for that particular point in time. And so I think speaker training, where they go, this is the way that you do it, is not necessarily optimal. I think, if you're only going to be speaking to a very particular kind of audience, then that might be the way to do it. But if you want to be able to extend your range so that you can connect with a wider range of people, it might not be the way to do it. And again, this is kind of what spiral somatics is about.
So James, dare I say, from my perspective, it sounds like to learn this could kind of be a pretty spiritual experience, in the sense that you could identify with everybody. Have you ever had people describe it that way? Or have you ever had anybody say that to you?
I probably have. There's a guy who recently has been doing my NLP Master Practitioner training who probably would describe it that way, because that's the way that he does the world a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that others have necessarily described it like that, but people certainly do have, not everyone and not all of the time, but people certainly do have profound experiences, let's say. Because at a very surface level, a lot of people that come to learn spiral somatics, are here to learn things like how to understand people much better, how to connect with people on much deeper levels, how to be effortlessly influential, that kind of thing, and all of those things are kind of outcome oriented. All of those things kind of are valuable if you're someone who wants to achieve certain things in the world. And so certain kinds of people really they come to spiral somatics from that particular perspective. And then when we start going into this fluidity of identity stuff, when people start developing a lot more fluidity in how they themselves do the world, oftentimes that opens up, because it opens up parts of them that haven't been opened up for a long time, or in some cases just haven't been opened up before. And they get to experience a very different relationship with particular ways of doing the world. They get to see certain ways of doing the world that before they had perhaps had uncharitable views about, and they begin to really kind of see and appreciate that this is actually a perfectly good way of doing the world, and it makes sense, and there's nothing bad about it. There is no way of doing the world that is inherently bad. It's just whether or not it makes sense to you as an external observer. And oftentimes when people kind of get those kinds of references in themselves, they develop a lot more flexibility in how they are in the world, and they change the way that they view others in the world. It can be quite a profound experience. And pretty much every time I teach this, for at least one or two people, they're going to have some pretty profound awakenings, let's say. Whether they describe that as spiritual or not is, depends on how they choose to view it.
Yeah,
Well,
sounds pretty great.
It sounds great. It sounds empowering. It sounds like it has the potential for opening up compassion and for lessening your reactiveness to attack and insult and offense and criticism and all that stuff.
Yeah. I think I suspect that this is purely just coming from my head brain right now rather than my heart brain or my gut brain, but I suspect that compassion is a second level past the reducing the reactiveness. I think that reduction in the way in which you react to different ways of doing the world is kind of required for compassion to then emerge, as it were.
No, I have a practical question. If somebody were to do your training, would they need to have a background in spiral dynamics? Is that a prerequisite, or would they get everything they needed from your course for what you're teaching?
They would get everything they needed from this course, and here's the reason. In fact, if someone has a background in spiral dynamics, they might have some unlearning to do, because it's not spiral dynamics. I have the word spiral in the title as a bit of a nod to spiral dynamics, but this fundamentally is about the body-mind connection, and there's a lot of different ways of dividing up human experience or dividing the world up, making sense of the world, let's say. A lot of different models out there, because a model is just a way that we have of making sense of things. Mathematics is a model, right? Physics is a model. Every way that we have as human beings of making sense of anything, any way that we have of making sense of things that's been formalized and written down or given labels or given structures is a model. And no model is true. They're all just ways of making sense of things. They're just ways of arbitrarily kind of dividing up human experience. And so spiral dynamics is a model. It's one model, one way of kind of carving up human values and human culture and human experience. There's lots of other models that are out there as well. I chose to use the model of spiral dynamics to draw some distinctions from. I don't teach the model wholesale. I don't teach the whole of the spiral dynamics model by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a very valuable model, particularly when exploring large-scale systems. If you're looking at the dynamics in countries, in cultures, in large organizations, in large-scale systems, I think spiral dynamics is a fantastic model to make sense of cultural phenomena, as it were. When it comes to individuals, though, and that's mostly my playground, like I work with individuals, I work with individual human beings. I don't think spiral dynamics as a model applies as well on an individual level as it does on a large-scale level. For a number of reasons, I've got a number of issues with people applying spiral dynamics on an individual level because it just doesn't fit in certain ways. I'm not going to go into details about that, but suffice it to say that there's certainly no requirements for any familiarity with spiral dynamics before someone comes on this training. There's not even any requirement for people to have any experience with NLP or anything at all. Anyone can come and learn this.
Cool. You know, a lot of our nonverbal communication is learned behavior. You know, we learn to nod and shake our head and a lot of other things too. How much is the understanding of the somatics related to culture as opposed to kind of a universal thing for being human?
Yeah. That's a really cool question. So here's the thing. All of the stuff that you will learn at Spiral Somatics is culturally universal. That's one of the things that I love about it, and it's fucking awesome, frankly, because you can literally go anywhere in the world, and you've got even if you don't speak the language, you've got data. The moment that you can see people, you can get a sense of, well, what kind of place am I in right now? You know,
cool.
So it's very neat. However, the patterns of physiology that you will learn when you come to, well, you know, should someone come to learn Spiral Somatics, are culturally universal. And in addition, inside any individual culture, there's other patterns which are not culturally universal. And so there's certain other patterns that kind of go with these ways of doing the world that are culturally idiosyncratic. So the stuff that I teach is culturally universal. You find that stuff everywhere. And what you'll also find is that in certain parts of the world, in certain places, there's going to be other little bits of things, other little kind of somatic components that are idiosyncratic to that particular place. Which is one of the interesting things that I love about traveling, because I get to kind of experience constantly, wherever I go, I get to experience the universality of spiral somatics. And I also, in a number of places, get to see like other things that are, idiosyncratic here in this particular place that don't translate to different cultures. It's a little bit like you were talking about we learn to nod and shake our heads,
Mm-hmm.
which is really cool, because nod means yes and shake means no, unless you're in Bulgaria, in which case it's reversed, right? Like, what? That's wild.
Right.
You get little things like that.
For the Indian head nod thing, right?
Yeah. I got to tell you, last time I was in India a couple of weeks ago, and it was my fourth trip there now. And
where in India?
I was in Mumbai.
Oh, Mumbai. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll be going back to India every year for some time. I'm on a bit of a mission with regards to India, NLP in India in particular. That's a whole other story. But anyway,
Sounds interesting.
I've been there a few times. It is, but we could do a couple of hours just on that. So let's not go there. But fourth time I've been in India. And I think it's a combination of the fact that I've been there a few times now, and also the fact that I'm a modeler, that I found myself in India this last trip doing stuff with my heads that I can't even consciously now do with my head. Right? I could not consciously replicate the stuff that I just found my head doing. I think it's like my head is starting to learn Indian nonverbals on its own without me, as it were. At some point I'll catch up and I'll recognize what's going on and be able to do it.
Very cool. James, could you talk a little bit about how you, or maybe any predecessors to the work that you've done, how was this uncovered? How was this discovered?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it started with my mentor, because I mentioned previously my mentor is someone who had a great degree of expertise in the field of spiral dynamics, and so he had world-class expertise in two fields, in the field of NLP and in the field of spiral dynamics. And spiral dynamics is largely, it's a conceptual model. It's what some people might describe in the field of NLP, some people might describe as a content model. It's not a model that describes how to do something, as it were. It's just a model that describes how things are, right? Because in terms of different kinds of models, there are predictive models, there are descriptive models, there are process models, NLP is largely about models that describe how to do stuff, because it's about modeling, it's about reproducing things. But spiral dynamics is not really a process model. It's it's a descriptive model and a predictive model, or attempting to be a predictive model, let's say. But Roger, as someone who was masterful not just in spiral dynamics but also NLP, wanted to know if there was how, if there was, like, a lot of the things that we pay attention to in NLP is the connection between body mind. How do you be able to? There's one of the core skills in NLP is something called calibration, which is about recognizing patterns in physiology that are consistently correlated with certain patterns of someone's emotional state. And so once you get a consistent baseline, once you've got consistent data that when someone's in a certain state, their physiology is a certain way, you've got a pretty good educated guess that the next time you see their physiology like that, they may be in that state. This is one of the core skills of NLP that we rely on to do just about everything. And so Roger wanted to know, could this stuff from spiral dynamics, could these kind of worldviews, these ways that people do the world, could that be calibrated? Is it something that's going to be reflected in someone's body? And I don't know that anybody else had that thought before. And if they did, I don't know that anybody did what Roger did, because he set out to answer that question. And he first experimented with a few things. He just started making some kind of intuitive links himself between certain ways of doing the world and certain kinds of gestures and stuff like that. People have talked about satir categories in the Facebook thread about this Zoom conversation right now.
Yeah.
And one of the places that he started was with satir categories. He wanted to know, was there a kind of a consistent lineup between satir categories and certain ways of doing the world? That's where he started. It was very roughshod. It didn't work out so well. It wasn't satisfactory. But Roger also, he had this idea at one point, which, as far as I'm concerned, this was the magic idea that in reflection now, I can look back on and go, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? But nobody else had that idea. So Roger was someone who also, at a certain point in his life, owned a chiropractic clinic. He was never a chiropractor, but in Australia, up until a certain point in time, they changed the laws, but up until a certain point in time, as a business person, you could own a chiropractic clinic and employ chiropractors. Now it's the case that if you want a chiropractic clinic, the owner has to be a chiropractor, but there was a point in time where you could just own a chiro clinic and employ chiropractors. And so Rog did that and got to know a lot of chiropractors, became kind of entwined, I guess, with the chiropractic community. And he had this brilliant idea. And as best I know, it went kind of like this. Roger at one point went, I've got all of these chiros. Okay, well, and got a bunch of chiros together and said, can I describe a certain kind of person, let's say, to you? And you tell me if you've got any patients like this, And so described a certain way of doing the world, and said, do you have patients that do this a lot? That have, this is a big part of how they do the world. And they went, yeah, we've got a few people like that. And he said, cool. Do they have things in common that they, as physical complaints that they come in with that you need to kind of work on? Do they have kind of common patterns of adjustments that you need to make to their spine? And they went, I don't know, we'll have to go check. And so they went to check their records. And sure enough, there are some common patterns. And so Rog just went, great. So for someone to have that kind of spinal issue, let's say, how would they be standing? How would they be moving? How would their spine have to be in order for them to have that kind of issue? And so he got a demonstration of, well, here's how they would be standing, here's how they would be moving, etc. And so then he went off and, and looked for that stuff in the world to confirm, is this something that's a pattern here? And so he discovered that there are, in fact, certain common patterns, particularly in terms of how people hold their spines, that go with ways of doing the world. And so that was kind of the beginnings of his work, tracking what you can see in physiology when people have a particular way of doing the world. So he taught that stuff, and he modeled some really kind of basic patterns. And the thing about that, though, was that there's a lot of complexity in terms of how human beings do things, and Roger was really good at being able to recognize that degree of complexity and subtlety with people. And he was good at being able to recognize that even non-verbally, but that was something that he did intuitively. He'd never kind of explicitly mapped how he was able to recognize the complexities that were going on in terms of the way that this person did the world. And so I wanted to get some of that stuff. And so I started kind of modeling what are the things that he's responding to. When Roger kind of recognizes that someone's doing a combination of a few different ways of doing the world in a certain way, what's he responding to? What's showing up in someone's physiology? And so then I did a bit of modeling of Roger, basically, to get those kind of extra distinctions. And then and just kept on developing, basically. At some point, Rog decided to stop teaching that stuff, and I thought that was just silly. And so I asked him if he minded if I just kept on going and kept on developing and exploring and that kind of thing. And he was very happy for me to continue doing so. And so I kept on mapping more stuff and more subtleties, and went out and did a bit of correcting. There are certain kind of physical patterns that he didn't quite have, and when I began to explore and find people in the world who did a certain way of doing the world, and recognize what was going on in their physiologies, I recognized some of the kind of the important stuff that he missed, and so I just kind of kept on developing on his initial work, and just did that for well, I'm still going, really. It's, been doing that for nearly 15 years, I guess, kind of building on his work and extending it to the point now where it's, I had the opportunity recently to see some video. I hadn't been in a training room with Rog for over a decade, and I hadn't seen him teaching the stuff that he'd mapped for much longer than that. And I saw some video recently of him teaching his stuff, the stuff that kind of started this all. And it's like chalk and cheese. It's spiral somatics as it is today is well beyond and a lot more intricate and a lot more subtle and a lot more comprehensively mapped than anything that Roger started with. But it is nonetheless something that didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged as my extension and refinement of the work that Roger started. That started with his intention to, discover, is there a way in which you can track this stuff in physiology? And the incredible good fortune of the fact that he had a chiropractic clinic at some point, and the brilliant idea of checking this stuff with chiropractors and seeing if there's any patterns in terms of people's spines and this kind of stuff. So the way that I like to describe this kind of thing is that it's a little bit like, when people learn spiral somatics, it blows their minds and they go, wow, this is amazing, and it's a little bit like, I'm the person that invented the flat screen LED television. It looks amazing. It's fantastic, but Roger's the person that invented television. And the difference in terms of significance of those things is just, this is the guy that brought something out of nothing. I just took work that he started and developed it a lot further. But it was his initial motivations, his initial ideas, his initial insights that started this whole thing. And so that's where that stuff comes from.
Very interesting. I guess since it sort of partially emerged out of the analysis of the spine, and some help was obtained from some professionals, some chiropractors. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, is this something that has any health applications?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm not the right person to ask about that. People do sometimes ask that, and I'm like, I'm not a health practitioner. I could make something up, but I don't actually know. I have had some people learn. What I do know is that I've had some people learn spiral somatics that took to it really well because they come from those kinds of backgrounds. I had a guy recently who was an osteopath from New Zealand that got the physiology like that. I had a guy last time I was in Edinburgh who was a physiotherapist. People that have a lot to do with the body, dancers and physios and chiros and osteopaths and people that are kind of intimately acquainted with the body and how it functionally, structurally works. Pilates instructors and stuff like that tends to get the physiology really easily because they have a lot of control over their own physiology. They can demonstrate things in their own physiology. They have a lot of flexibility already. As to how this can be made use of for health applications, I don't know. I suspect that might be the case simply because there are certain ways of doing the world that, like, I know that, for example, there was a question that I think came from James, is it James Key?
Yeah, Dr. Key.
Yeah, I think there was a question that came from James Key on Facebook about this Zoom chat. Which was, if there are kind of habitual ways that people hold their body through either habits or, nature, nurture, whatever it might be, does that affect how people do the world? And that's absolutely the case. So people, for example, who do yoga for 30 years cannot not develop a certain way of doing the world because of what they're doing with their body and their spine and their muscles. People that do, traditional Japanese martial arts end up developing a certain way of the world because of what they habitually do with their etc. But that link would go the other way around as well. So if there is an ideal, if there's a physical ideal, for example, that chiropractors work towards, then helping someone develop a certain way of doing the world will naturally help them start shifting their body in those particular ways. these things link together. And similarly, if you want to help someone develop a certain way of doing the world, there are certain physical practices that you can have them do, that if they just do those practices, after a while, they're going to start holding themselves in certain ways, and they'll find certain attitudes and certain ways of doing the world emerging from that. So I suspect that on the basis of that, there could be some health applications, but I'm not the right person to ask about that stuff. I would ask Dan Moore about that. I'd ask Ilad about that. There's other people that I'd ask about that. And I may do, now that you've asked the question.
Sure. Well, I'm very fascinated because, I'm an occupational therapist. And so all the physiology stuff you're describing, I'm just itching to know more about it. Like, for example, I mean, just to throw something out there. Like, I know that if somebody's shoulder girdles are forward a little bit, then in 20 or 30 years, they're going to wear out the shoulder joints.
Yeah.
So the way that the shoulder joint is meeting itself, right? And so it seems like just with little bits and pieces of knowledge like that to take the filter of what you're teaching and be able to see long-term patterns of what people's bodies might be doing just based upon what they think. It kind of blows my mind. I would love to be able to do that. That's pretty neat. I have met people before where I look at them, I think, this guy has neck pain, and I don't know why I know that. And he's got neck pain, so there's some part of us that somehow can recognize things, and it sounds like you've got some of the dust off that, and you can see it clearly. Yeah,
very much. And I've got to tell you, the thing that you were just talking about in terms of the rotation of the shoulders and whatnot, if you encounter people like that, that's going to be a really tricky one in terms of the body-mind stuff, because that would be something that would emerge as a certain way of doing the world. It's not the only thing that would lead to that, but it's something that would emerge as a certain way of doing the world, which is a very very resolute, let's say, way of doing the world. When people have these kind of values, it takes an enormous amount to get them to shift those values. There are certain ways of doing the world that are people can quite kind of fluidly move between, like they're people can very easily and happily kind of drop that and move on to something else. And there are others that are a little bit more resistant to change, as it were. And so that particular pattern with the shoulders, if it's associated with this certain model of worlds, could be a tricky one, because that's a way of doing the world that takes a bit to budge, because it kind of trumps everything else, basically.
Very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that one. I was just working with someone like that in my practice, and this person responds very well to guided visualization and various kinds of methods. But I always have to remind this person to kind of connect and contact their spine and lift and reinforce the experience of what they're experiencing by physiologically shifting their body. And they tend to go back very easily, back into that old pattern. So what you're saying, absolutely, I've seen that to be true. And it takes a lot of effort to get them to kind of like, hey, you got to really step into this. You got to really open up your spine. You got to believe this fully and completely. You got to, sometimes I have to physically adjust them and say, like this. And now feel that and feel the difference of how this feels like. Remember this, picture yourself this way. And it's tough to get them to shift because of that physical, slouch. And, that makes sense. How have you found that this understanding that you have, which is a unique understanding and a deep understanding and a multi-layered understanding, has it affected, say, your application of NLP and hypnosis and things like that?
Profoundly. As a side note, by the way, I never used to use the word hypnosis. I never used to describe myself as a hypnotist or say that I did hypnosis. I've discovered in recent years that much of what I do would be described as hypnosis, and if I demonstrated certain things, I would probably be considered someone who had some expertise in the field of hypnosis, but I never kind of think like that, as it were. But in terms of application of, with regards to everything else that I do, it's been absolutely profound. Like anything involving human beings, anything involving an interaction between me and anybody else, or anybody and anybody else, anything involving human beings. My very first filter, as it were, right? Like the first thing that happens for me is I'm recognizing what's going on here in terms of spiral. And then in response to that, then doing things, whatever those things happen to be. So, I'm a trainer. Most of what happens in my professional life involves groups of people, So I have a group of people in front of me. One of the first things that happens, the first thing that happens really is I go, what's going on here in terms of spiral? And this is quite valuable in a number of different ways. So one of the ways is sometimes what will happen is you'll have a group full of people where there are a couple of particular ways of doing the world that for whatever reason are just really common in this particular group. And that's really valuable because that then kind of guides me in terms of how do I need to be of value to these particular people? What kinds of things are these people going to sink their teeth into? What kinds of things have they already got down pat? And where are their kind of weak points? What are the stuff that we're going to need to, for me to be of best use for this particular group of people? What should I be doing?
Yeah.
But the other thing is in terms of group dynamics, and that group could be 2 people, could be just me and someone else, or it could be a room full of 20 people. You're going to see certain patterns play out that are often results of the generalizations that people make about certain ways of doing the world. You're going to see prejudices come out and biases come out and this kind of thing. There are certain things that are going to be predictable in terms of the relationships between different people. There are certain people, for example, there's an expression that I like to use when there are 2 people that do a certain way of doing the world. And if you'll forgive me, I'm not labeling things here. We've been talking for quite some time. I haven't labeled anything specifically yet. So I've been using these broad phrases like certain ways of doing the world. And I'll continue to do that. So when there are 2 people who do a lot of a particular way of doing the world, you can guarantee that when they meet, they are going to get on like a house on fire. The only question is, does that mean in the sense of get along really well, or does that mean in the sense of chaos, destruction, and people screaming and fleeing the premises kind of thing? Because one of those things is going to happen. There's not going to be a middle ground, right? Either these 2 people will get on and just immediately bond and be best friends, or they'll be like mortal enemies. There'll be no gray area, and so when there's 2 people in a group that do a lot of this particular, I know that that's going to happen. And so one of the things that I'll always set out to do is to see if I can shape things so that it leans more towards best friends rather than mortal enemies. It's just of inestimable value in terms of how do you present ideas, because the way that you introduce things, the way that you present an idea has to resonate, has to be something that makes sense, has to be something that is compelling for the person that you're talking to, how to lead someone in a particular direction, and presenting ideas could be teaching, could be, if you're an agent of change, could be presenting the idea of seeing the world a different way or doing a different kind of behavior or something like that, introducing the possibility of difference, basically. And the way that you present those things, the way that you introduce those things is going to be formed by what you're seeing in front of you, and particularly what you're seeing in terms of how people respond to things. Because just as, Satch a while ago was talking about roles and talking about, in certain contexts, I might have the role of a husband and father, of an uncle, of an employee, etc. One of the things that's quite valuable in terms of spiral somatics is being able to recognize, and this is a bit more advanced and requires a little bit of poking, but being able to recognize what ways of doing the world are going to come out in this person in certain circumstances. So regardless of what you're seeing in front of you right now, how do you recognize how this person is likely to be in certain circumstances, or when talking to a certain person, or when faced with a certain task, right? Where do they go at different points in time? So, if for example, that if you're a therapist, right, and you're talking to somebody and you know that whenever they talk about their problem context, right, the thing that they come in wanting to sort out, whenever they talk about that, they go into a certain way of doing the world. And given that way of doing the world, it's really easy to see how they can sustain that problem. It's really easy how they can not see how they can move past that, how they could go somewhere new.
Right.
be other ways of doing the worlds that they do that from that perspective, that wouldn't even look like a problem. It would just be a no-brainer, and being able to recognize that and recognize, okay, in what contexts does this person operate where that wouldn't even be a problem for them, right? That's information that's quite valuable as well in terms of how do you get someone to move from point A to point B. You can get in touch with that part of them that is already operating in a way that wouldn't be a problem, and let them listen to that part of themselves, basically. There's a lot of stuff. This kind of informs everything in my experience involving interactions with other human beings. And that's just always been the case. It's a no-brainer.
It sounds just invaluable for leadership development in general. And, you're talking about group dynamics and, teaching, training. So if someone's working on their leadership abilities or leadership qualities, it seems like a wonderful way to develop it.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in particular, when, leadership's an interesting thing, when from the point of view of NLP, if we kind of go out of spiral somatics and into NLP a little bit, leadership is an example of one of those words that in the jargon of NLP would be described as a nominalization. And it's not a thing in and of itself, but a lot of people kind of value this idea of leadership, but the activity involved in that is leading. And if you're leading, you have to be going somewhere. You have to be going somewhere specific, and people have to be willing to follow you of their own accord into that particular. So spiral is fantastic. Spiral somatics is fantastic in terms of being the kind of person that people will just voluntarily automatically follow without you even asking. You just be the right kind of person and people will just follow you, which is great. But for that to happen, you have to also be going somewhere. So as for the purposes of leadership, there's the additional component of, do you know where you're going and where you want to go?
Right.
Because a lot of people don't seem to have that idea in mind. I don't know what they're thinking, but unless you're going somewhere, then you're not leading anyone.
It's a great point.
Yeah. It sounds like another group of people that might benefit from this kind of training could be, artists, actors, painters, these kinds of people. It seems like, especially an actor, could really take tremendous inspiration from being able to embody other beings, other people, other ways of doing things.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had, last time I was teaching this in the UK, I had an actor in the group who found it quite valuable. And she's pretty cool, actually, this chick, Hannah. And if you happen to be watching / listening to this. And I've frequently found that people who do some acting, either professionally, semi-professionally, whatever it might be, or even people who do improv, this kind of thing, find tremendous value in spiral for that particular process, and my partner, Amy Bell, Amy has a background in, among other things, design and stuff like that, and her brother is an animator. Her brother does, little animated stuff, movies. He's an incredibly multi-talented guy. And one of the things that Amy's really got as a bit of a bee in her bonnet from ages ago when she first started learning spiral somatics was that this would be fantastic for animators. This would be fantastic for people that want to create a character on screen that portrays a certain way of doing the world. How do you animate that? How do you demonstrate that in physiology so that it really congruently is a non-verbal demonstration of a certain way of doing the world? And I think that's of great value. And I think certainly the actors who have learned this stuff have found quite a lot of value from it. And they typically also kind of take to it fairly well. There's a few kind of groups of people that take to this stuff pretty well. So people like, chiropractors and Pilates instructors and some yogis, depending on the style of yoga, people that are quite connected with their bodies and connected with how one can use one's body in different ways. And a lot of good actors, same kind of thing. They're quite aware of how they can do their bodies quite differently. They've got a lot of flexibility in that regard, which is quite handy. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of scope for application for people in those kinds of creative professions.
I just want to learn how to hold my spine so that every joke I say will be hilarious.
No.
So look for that one for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I do actually have a tip about that. That's later on. Come to the training. I'll show you.
Sounds good.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Up next, Carlos and Satch continue their conversation with James Tsakalos, the developer of Spiral Somatics. James will be in Orange County, California in September 2018 for an 8-day Spiral Somatics training seminar.
I'm assuming that since we're doing this a live training, it's not something that you do remotely. We're going to be physically with you in this room, and you're going to be hands-on, helping us to experience each of the somatic experiences that you're guiding us through. But is this something that at some level can also be done in a non-visual way? Like does it inform, let's say you were doing a remote phone interview with somebody. Is there a certain level of this that can be grokked or understood without the visual component there?
Yes, that's a really good question. That's pretty advanced kind of stuff. The answer to that is yes, if you've got the physiological stuff first. So someone who's got some really good references for spiral somatics in their body is going to already have developed a bunch of intuitions with regards to how this stuff plays out in terms of vocal characteristics. It's very advanced. It's going kind of next level stuff. So it's not something that I would typically teach explicitly in a spiral somatics training. I might do it as an optional extra exercise. In fact, I think I might have done that. Oh no, I didn't do that in India. As a bit of an optional extra. So I remember this one time when this is the first time I was in Edinburgh, actually 2007. And I had a few people there in the NLP fields that I was introducing at a very, very simple level, introducing some ideas for spiral somatics. And they were getting a bit excited. And one of those people was a guy called Michael Christen, who's an NLP trainer who was running courses in Edinburgh. And in the time that we were there, he was, I think he was going to be starting an NLP practitioner training, I think is what it was. And I was keen to see just the beginning of his training. And he lived not actually in the city of Edinburgh. He lived outside in a region called the Borders. And by the way, hi, Michael, if you ever happen to see or hear this. And so one time we're in Michael's car. There's a few of us in Michael's car, and we're driving from his place into the city of Edinburgh where he's going to be starting this course. And someone asked me in the car, can you track this stuff just in the sound of someone's voice? And I said, can people generally, or can I? And they said, no, can you? And I went, well, yeah. And they went, great, that'd be really cool. And Michael's got this car phone. He's got like a Bluetooth thing in his car, And so we're on the way to Edinburgh, and a phone call comes through, right? And so someone just goes, can you do it now? I went, all right, fine. So Michael answers the phone and says, hello, this is Michael. And the person on the other end of the phone introduces themselves and says like a sentence. And then I went, okay, here's a description of some things that this person does a lot of that they're very good at. Just did that, Michael finishes the phone call. Michael's sitting directly in front of me in the car, finishes the phone call, hangs up and goes, fuck off, right? I'm like, what? And he goes, how could you possibly know that? And I'm like, well, it's just the sound of this is what I do, And so they're a bit excited about that. And then there was a couple of other phone calls that he took on the way into because he's starting the course, and some people are calling to say that they're running late or something. I don't know what, but he had a few phone calls. And so there was, I think there was 2 more phone calls on the way to Edinburgh. And same thing happened, they do it again, and so the phone would ring and Michael would go, this is Michael, and the person would start, and I go, okay, here's some stuff about this person, and then same about the third person, and the whole time, Michael's going, how could you possibly know, and so then he wants to test and wants to experiment with this stuff, and he said, all right, can you, tell me some things? I've got all of these people turning up to this practitioner course. I know them all, right? I already know a bit about them. tell me your read on them. And I went, okay, I'll greet people at the door. And so I stood at the door of his practitioner course, and as people would come in, I'd say, hi, I'm James. I'd give them their name tag or book or whatever, and they'd kind of walk in. And then I'd turn to Michael and I go, okay, this is some stuff about this person. And I did this through, all of the people coming into the course. And, he got quite excited about that, and so did a few other people. But that's kind of started in the car on the way there, just purely with auditory.
Do you get accused of being psychic?
No, I don't think I've ever been accused of being psychic in regards to this stuff, which is weird, really. It's I don't know, it might be something about me.
Right, but, I would imagine that would happen.
Yeah, but it's it's not quite psychic stuff. It's just I'm reminded of a story that I was told that was attributed to John Grinder, and I don't know if this is the case because it's third hand,
Well, for those who don't necessarily know this, John Grinder is one of the co-founders of NLP.
Yes. And the story goes like this. Someone once asked John Grinder, do you ever work with the blind and the deaf? And he said, every fucking day. And I'm very much reminded of that kind of thing. When I teach spiral somatics, it's, people are like, how could you possibly? And I'm like, how could you not see this shit?
Right.
But I've made a certain study of it, let's say. But the thing about the voice in particular is that, yes, this is it's advanced stuff, and I don't usually teach this as part of the spiral somatics training, but voice is a physical quality. The way that voice works is that air goes into your body. It's shaped by the shape of your body. It moves through your body on the basis of how you're breathing, which is going to be based on how you're holding yourself. It's going to be moving through your body on the basis of how you're holding your throat and your chest and your mouth and all this kind of stuff. So the sound of someone's voice is intimately linked with how they're using their body. And so if you've got really good references for the embodied stuff, you're going to start developing some intuitions already about vocal qualities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was going to say that there are some similarities to what you're describing with spiral somatics that reminds me of some diagnostic techniques that are used in Chinese medicine. And what one interesting thing is there are some people who have a very advanced, intricate way of doing face reading, Chinese face reading. And I'm just curious if you've ever had a chance to look at any of that, and what your thoughts might be on that compared to what you do. Have you had that chance?
No, I don't really know an awful lot about Chinese face reading.
Well, one of the things I like about it that sounds similar to what you're describing is that it's absolutely not fortune telling. It's the idea that who you are, the habit of who you are, begins to shape your face. And so it's not like your face determines who you are. Who you are determines your face.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful lady named Lillian Bridges who's here in the United States that teaches this. She's part of a family from Shanghai that's many generations of doing this kind of face reading, and she would always say, look at pictures of couples when they were young, and then look at them when they're very old, and they start to look the same as they get older because they're living similar lives, and it's beautiful to see these pictures because I've always found it to be true. Yeah,
fantastic.
It's kind of neat. Yeah,
that's awesome. So there is one distinction that would be different in spiral somatics, though, because it would be a case of it's not just that who you are shapes your body, but how you use your body also shapes who you are. They can't be disconnected from each other.
Very nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Good distinction there. James, what are some specific things that you've seen in your years of teaching people this, that graduates of your classes have you've seen, like maybe in the form of transformations or changes in their lives? What have you noticed, and what have you heard about or witnessed?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because this is one of those things where, because it's one of the things that I need to really kind of head off at the pass when I start teaching spiral somatics is the following. People, particularly people who come from a background, let's say in NLP. often have this brain that's kind of fixated on techniques, and oftentimes people would ask me things like, where would you use spiral somatics? What would you use spiral somatics for? We had the last time I was doing a gig in the UK, there was a question from someone about, is spiral somatics suitable for working with like really deep issues, or is it just something for, and I'm like, what the fuck are you even talking about? It's not a therapeutic approach. It's not, and it's not a technique. It's not something that you do to get some particular result. This is an understanding. I'm reminded of Jamie Smart came out here a little while ago. A couple of students of mine organized a big conference called NLP Superfest, and they brought some people out, brought a few of my friends out, which is pretty cool. But one of those people was Jamie Smart, and he was talking about the distinction between application-based learning and implication-based learning. So application-based learning is, when you learn something that has specific applications. This is a process that you do in this circumstance to get this particular result. And you make sense of it in terms of where do you apply it and what do you do with it and that kind of thing. But then there's implication-based learning, which is the kind of thing that when you learn how things are, that then just informs how you do things. It informs how you make decisions. It informs how you do stuff. And spiral semantics is really an example of implication-based learning. It's one of those things that when you learn this, the applications are really kind of down to you. Like there's a million different ways in which people can make use of this kind of stuff, depending on who you are and this kind of thing, because it's just about developing a much greater understanding of how people work and a much greater understanding of how you work and the ability to connect and really experience what it's like to be in someone's world, as it were. Because one of the ideas in the field of NLP, which I think has never really been satisfactorily offered, I guess, is this idea of meeting people at their model of the world. There's this idea that this is really important. You should meet people where they're at, and most of the time for most people, what that amounts to, with the best intention of the world, what that amounts to is kind of coming up and it's almost like someone's in a house across the street, right? And you come up to the edge of your fence and you look across the street at their house and you wave and you go, hey, I can see you there at your house I can see where you live. It looks like a really nice house. But you've never been inside. You've never actually been there. You're looking at it from the outside, And so it's, you can respect someone's model of the world. You can see it from the outside. You can go, wow, that's a really great way of doing the world. But you've never really been there. You've never been inside it. You don't know what it's like to be in that world. You're always meeting them as someone from the outside, as an outsider, as it were. And, a big part of spiral semantics is about meeting people on the inside, really going into this world and living inside this world and going, hey, I'm here with you. I'm in this same space, and the ability to do that and the ability to understand where people are at much better, and the ability to develop a lot of flexibility in how you yourself identify, like in terms of this flexibility and fluidity of identity. If you had the ability to identify as any kind of person that you wanted at any time, well, how would you use that? Right? Like it's not really application based. It just opens up lots of choice. It opens up lots of possibility in the world, and it generally kind of informs how you go about doing things, how you go about interacting with people, and the decisions to make, the choices that you make. So you might make much better informed decisions about things. And so, the kinds of things that people have done having learned spiral are so many and varied, because it's fundamentally about how humans go about being human. It's fundamentally about understanding people and understanding connection and this kind of thing. So, I could offer some specific kind of content examples, but they're really kind of surface level stuff. I could talk about how, for example, James, for example, talked about how when he came and he learned a bit of spiral from me in Melbourne, and then went over to the States. And his view was that being from the UK and having spent a bit of time in South Africa and spent a bit of time in Australia, where they're different cultures, but nonetheless, they're still kind of similar. They're largely similar to kind of UK culture. And his experience was that going to the States, it was just a big culture shock. Like, this is just really very different culture from what he was familiar with. And he found that spiral was incredibly valuable in terms of him being able to connect with people in spite of the fact that this would previously have been alien to him, because it wasn't alien anymore. He just found himself going into a certain way of being in the world and just connecting naturally and effortlessly with people in a variety of different kind of cultural contexts. I can talk about how
I witnessed that, by the way.
cool.
I witnessed him. I mean, I've seen him joking around about, God forbid, hugs. We're from California and we hug. That's just what we do.
Great.
Hey, how's it going? We, big, nice, big, warm bear hugs. And he was here. He certainly exchanged a lot of bear hugs with everybody, all my buddies, and he was relaxed and had a great time, and it was fun hanging out. He played music with us, and we were just like kind of storming heaven, discussing things. And you could really see that he was enjoying stepping into a different model of the world and just interacting and kind of living from that. And it was just seemed very natural. It seemed like, oh yeah, he's just hanging out. He's part of the crew,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, we're talking about James Tripp.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's good. That's good to know, by the way, because I'm a bit of a hugger, so that's good.
Oh yeah. Good.
Okay, California, we're good. All right.
Yeah.
So I've been wondering about this actually because of the whole cultural difference thing.
Yeah.
I know that California is not the same necessarily as other parts in the United States, and the United States has all of these different kind of cultures in different places.
It's true.
And I know that there are people that are traveling from different places, and so I'm really kind of curious to see what I discover when I'm there in September.
Right.
But yeah, I could offer some other examples as well. So Judy, I've got one of my students has a PhD in neuropsychology. And sees a lot of neuropsych clients, and is of the view that spiral somatics has been invaluable to her in terms of introducing ideas and helping people to change the way that they think about things and feel about things. I've got another student who's a coach, does a lot of coaching with people, and does this really cool stuff where she will have someone who's experiencing something as a problem, and literally without explaining anything at all, we'll just coach them into doing their physiology in a different way. And we'll go, cool, so with your physiology like this, tell me about this thing that you were saying was a problem, how you think about it like this, how do you think about it like, get them into a different physiology and a different physiology and a different physiology, and finds that their beliefs just merge and change. A lot of the people that I train work with groups of people, corporate trainers and facilitators and stuff like that. They find it invaluable in terms of knowing how best to engage this particular group of people and get people really kind of enrolled and engaged quite quickly and quite easily, and on board with regards to the ideas that they're presenting, etc. I have another friend who has found the same set of skills with regards to spiral somatics. He's found them to be of great value in business and also great value in certain personal circumstances. This is a guy who has done in the past a lot of network marketing. And when you're doing network marketing, one of the things that you want is you want to be able to make connections with people who are the right kinds of people who you can then introduce and hopefully will be suitable for the business that you're engaged in.
Can you teach us how to protect ourselves from the network marketers when you do that?
Well, most of them are pretty crap anyway.
I want to know the antidote to protect me, the spell I have to cast around me to protect me.
But yeah, I can.
It sounds like for you, you'd really like to have these concepts in more places in the world. So how would you say that, from the world's perspective, how do you think this is going to make a difference by having this in more places? Like having more people know about it is going to create what result you think?
From the world's perspective. Wow, that's ambitious.
It is ambitious. From your common sense point of view.
From the world's perspective, my God. What difference will that make? I think it just needs to get out there. I think this is one of those things that if more people know about this, if more people know about, first of all, just the fact that people live in different worlds, like just that alone, I think is revolutionary for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people assume that the way that they make sense of the world is just the way that everybody makes sense of the world, and that's just not the case. It's people live in fundamentally different worlds. Every human being lives in a totally different world. Where one of the things about learning spiral somatics is that it allows you to visit alien worlds. You can kind of go into the way that this person does the world and experience that. It's really, really trippy and interesting stuff. And just recognizing that the way that you make sense of things, the things that just seem common sense to you, the things that seem self-evident to you, are not necessarily common sense and self-evident to other people, that people have very different ways of doing things, that your way of doing the world is not necessarily true or right or universal or anything like that. I think just that idea alone, frankly, is quite revolutionary. But I think in particular, the ability to both recognize where people are at, just like literally the moment that you see them, like being able to kind of have that sense of where this person is coming from, rather than kind of going from scratch and starting blank, is quite valuable. But the most valuable thing, I think, for human beings generally is, again, just coming back to this kind of deeper level stuff of developing this flexibility, this fluidity in terms of how you identify, of how you do the world. So that you can kind of break out of these roles of, there are so many people that are kind of stuck in this idea that I just couldn't do that. It just wouldn't be me, right? The idea that something wouldn't be them. If you did something and it wouldn't be you, then who the fuck would it be, right? If you did it, like it's strange, right? But people have this idea that it wouldn't be me. If I did that, it wouldn't be. Of course, it would be you. It would just be a different you, And people have this idea that I couldn't do that. I'm not one of those kinds of people, right? I'm just not one of those, But if you recognize that you are a human being, you've got the neurology and the physiology of, it's the same as other human beings. You can be anyone. You can be anyone that you want to be. And I don't mean that in the sense of you can choose to be the particular person that you want to be. I mean that at any moment in time, you can be moments to moment who you want to be in that particular moment. You can be who the situation calls for in that particular moment, and be able to adapt and be able to be flexible and to be able to, one of the things about Roger that I really admired, that this is kind of all about as well, is that I use this particular phrase. It's a very subtle but important difference. A lot of people are really good at getting on with different kinds of people. Roger was really good at getting in with different kinds of people, of just fitting in, of just being one of these people, And this is what spiral somatics is about. It's something that allows you to, no matter where you are, to just be part of this community, so that you never have to be a stranger anywhere, right? Anywhere you go, you can just be part of this community and just be completely internally, congruently, comfortably part of this community, whatever this community happens to be. I think that's of tremendous value, because that reduces conflict, it reduces tension, it reduces the us and them kind of stuff that people can get into, and I think that would be a tremendous advantage.
Well, that's the T-shirt. I mean, don't just get on with, get in with.
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, you're saying right now what was coming to mind earlier, which is this idea that, there's so much angst and anger and rage and a lack of ability to understand each other, a lack of willingness to want to discuss or even hear an opposing point of view, or a lack of desire to see it from another point of view. I hear a lot of people who are even older than me telling me, or kind of repeating that, it used to be that you could have dialectic. It used to be that you could have differing points of view and everything would be all right. And now it's dangerous sometimes to express your point of view. It can lead to violence. It can lead to terrible things sometimes, just because you are emphatically expressing an opinion about something, and it's made it, I think, people a lot more cautious, a lot more drawn in, a lot more protective of themselves, less, or maybe artfully vague and less specific more often, and it's been divisive. It's been creating schisms. So as I hear you and I hear what you've been telling me, I think it would be amazing to have more people practiced in the skill of entering into other people's way of doing the world and exploring the areas inside themselves that they're not feeling a desire to look at or to experience. Because by noticing that and noticing what's going on in their body, it seems like they could develop a lot more understanding, a lot better conflict resolution skills, a lot better connection with the community around them, even if they don't live life that way all the time.
But they'll still have the choice to live life that way. And again, it comes back again to what you just said. It's about understanding. If any time that there's a particular way of doing the world that you don't like, or that you react to in some way, or that you think is bad, or you think is silly, or whatever, those things always come from just a lack of understanding. That's all there is to it. It just means that you don't have really good internal representations of what it's like to be in that way of doing the world. Because if you did, you'd recognize that there's nothing bad about it. It's just as good, just as valid, just as wholesome, just as integrated as any other way of doing the world. And it's just about developing that understanding.
Is there an authentic you underneath all of those, sort of that flexibility of being able to do the world in different ways? And if so, what is that, or how would you know?
Now, there's the $1 million question, isn't it? That's a really, really interesting question. And you can kind of take that out of the context of spiral somatics and just ask that question generally. Is there an authentic you? Is there an authentic you that is, separate from popular culture, that's separate from your upbringing, that's separate from peer pressure, that's separate from the things that you've learned and where you grew up and all of that kind of stuff? I think that we are a culmination of everything that has shaped us in our lives, and there is only one you. There's lots of different ways of doing the world and all that kind of stuff, but there's only one person that has all of your selves. There's only one person that has all of your memories, that has all of your tastes, that has all of these things. And that's always going to be you. And no matter what choices you make in terms of moments to moments, how to be in that particular moment, how to do the world in that particular moment, it's still you doing and living and experiencing all of those things.
Beautiful. So with that being said, I kind of want to wrap up or move towards the end of this interview with a question about this course that we're going to do. That's coming up in September of 2018, starting on September 5th, and it'll be in Irvine, which is Orange County, Southern California. Can you maybe just briefly go over some of the basics, like the structure of how we're going to do the class? Not necessarily in great detail, but just so that we have an idea as we move in. What shall we expect, and how should we dress, and what should we bring with us, and what's it going to be like, kind of?
Okay. Well, robes will be provided. I've not kind of looked into the livestock options nearby, but I'd imagine there's somewhere where we can get a
goats are all right, right?
Yeah, goats are fine.
Okay.
Goats are fine.
Black candles, white candles, red candles.
A simple white. So it's you can't go wrong with a white candle, frankly.
That's true.
Yeah, red's nice. Black is a little bit, I don't know, it ends up looking a bit dirty, Yeah. So, and no, seriously, there's none of that stuff is going to be happening. I'm pretty straightforward. What you see is what you get. So we're going to be, I don't know what the venue's like. You know the venue. I don't know the venue, but.
It's an open room, Yeah.
I'm pretty casual. There's not going to be for the first couple of days. There'll be a bit of information. There'll be a bit of kind of conceptual stuff, and there'll be a bit of discussion and this kind of thing. Okay. But what it's predominantly going to be is a training. Training is not lecture. It's not about information. It's not presentation. It's not about just changing how you think about things. Training is about developing the ability to do stuff. And so it's going to be very hands-on. You'll be doing lots of things, doing lots of exercises involving getting your body into different positions, finding out what it's like to move in different ways, finding out the link between your body and mind and how that relates to some ideas that you will have been introduced to. It's going to be quite hands-on. There'll be some applications things in the last couple of days, but largely it's going to be about really kind of getting in and exploring things about yourself in a really hands-on way, and about relationships and connecting with people in a pretty hands-on way. Structurally, we'll be going from, I think about, my preference would be about 6 a.m. till about 10 at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fucking with you. I'm totally not going to go from 6 a.m. till 10 at night.
Yeah.
No, fairly standard kind of training days. I generally go for 9 to 6. And also what I can kind of culturally get away with. If I can get away with 9 to 6, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get away with 8 to 6, that's brilliant. If I can't, if it's just got to be 9 to 5, it's got to be 9 to 5. But I prefer 9 to 6. And the structure of this particular course is as follows. We'll have a few days. We'll have 4 days to kind of go over the real basics of spiral somatics. And then there'll be a 3-day gap. The 3-day gap is not the course is over for this particular part of the course. There'll be homework. It's not going to be structured homework, but it's going to be a case of get out into the world, because you'll have just spent 4 days learning things about the body-mind connection, learning things about what goes on with people when they're holding their bodies in certain ways. You'll be learning things about how people's bodies are shaped when they're doing the world in certain ways, and how that's going to play out in terms of the way that they interact with each other and this kind of thing. So you'll have 3 days to go into the world and watch and get data and find out what you find out. And what usually will happen is people will have the experience of going out into the world and going, holy crap, there's all this stuff that I've never seen before. And suddenly patterns become quite clear. And what's going to be of great value, by the way, is having people who are local, like you, Carlos, who know the neighborhood and who can kind of direct people to different, because in any place, particularly inside cities, right, in any place, there's going to be particular areas where you're going to see a lot of certain ways of doing the world. So there's going to be particular areas that are going to be kind of hustler areas. There's going to be particular areas that are very traditional, very kind of family-oriented areas. There's going to be particular areas that are very, what would you call it, risk-averse. People kind of doing, this is what's expected of me, and so, I've gone to university and I've gotten this job and all of this kind of stuff. There's going to be particular areas that are just the places that if you say the wrong thing on a Friday night, you'll get your head punched in. There's going to be a whole bunch of, there's going to be areas where you'll get you'll find a cafe where you won't be able to find a pork sausage for love or money, but you'll be able to find like fucking activated buckwheat, sprouted fucking seeds and that kind of. There's going to be, what I'm talking about. In any place, there's going to be, a number of different regions where if you want to see a particular way of doing the world playing out, you can go. If you go to the right kind of part of the world, you'll be able to see a lot of that stuff. And so it's really useful having locals who can advise people on, if you want to see this, go there. If you want to see this, go there. So people can kind of do field trips and stuff like that. It's completely not structured, by the way. There's not going to be a program for those 3 days off. It's just going to be a case of go out into the world, find out what you find out, because it's really important to, and this is not just with spiral somatics, this is with any kind of training. It's really important to take things outside of the training room and into the world, because that way you're going to see how things are outside a really structured, really controlled environment. And this is really important in learning anything. And it's definitely important in terms of learning spiral somatics. So you'll have a few days to go and just play and enjoy the world, watch people do stuff. And then we'll have another 4 days where we'll go into much more advanced stuff. So the first 4 days will largely be concerning ourselves with a very small set of variables in terms of different ways people do in the world. There'll be just half a dozen different kind of major variables that we'll be playing with in those first 4 days. And by the end of those 4 days, you'll be able to recognize and have a pretty good sense of half a dozen different ways of doing the world. And then in the second 4 days, we'll take those half a dozen and expand that into 15, and then we'll expand that into 20 odds, and then we'll expand that into over 100. So we'll go into a lot more complexity and a lot more sophistication in the second 4 days.
Wonderful. That sounds really exciting. And what you're describing on the break, I look forward to brainstorming with you and just hearing about all that. Because, I do know a lot of different places around here that we could explore, and I'm looking forward to just having you in general, because it's going to be fun to show you around.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you're coming, James, because I think this is going to be a special thing, and there's going to be some people here that really want to learn what you have to teach. And I'm already fascinated by everything that you've said. And gosh, I think you've done something really cool, really neat that the world does need to learn about. And that's really all I have to say. Thanks for joining us and sharing all this stuff. It's been beautiful.
My pleasure. Experiencing it is going to be way cooler than hearing about it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And as you said before, a person does not need to know about NLP or have any kind of background in that type of thing. This is a standalone experience and course, a training. And James Tsakalos is going to guide you from the beginning, from step one, and give you what you need to understand, all contained within the class. So for those of you who are hearing this and are curious about it, the course will begin on September 5th. And James, why don't you share your contact information and that website so that they know how to find you?
Sure. My contact information, my website is nlpmelbourne.com.au. Melbourne is MELBOURNE. nlpmelbourne.com.au. And if you go if you just go there and you click on courses, there'll be a drop-down menu from which you can then select Spiral Somatics, and all of the dates will be at the bottom of that page. You can just scroll down or you could just read through the page. There's lots of cool stuff on the page as well. There's a video there. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But at the bottom of that page, we'll have the dates, including the dates for California. And that's how you find that stuff. You can also find me on Facebook, by the way, which is going to be facebook.com/NLP Melbourne is my, page, my NLP trainer page. And you can also, feel free to just add me as a friend, by the way, if you want to just find my personal profile, facebook.com/James. I think Tsakalos, TSAKALOS.NLP. Are there dots on Facebook? I don't know. Maybe it's just James Tsakalos NLP. That's my personal profile. They're really the only places that you're going to find anything about me. I don't do other kind of platforms or anything. I think I've got a LinkedIn account somewhere, but I never look at it. I always just get updates that, somebody's looked at my profile or recommended me for something, which is...
That was me.
That was you?
Yeah, I looked at your profile.
Cool. Thanks. That's the thing that really does my head in about LinkedIn is that it's just, I'll go there and I just feel dirty looking at it,
Right.
But also you get these, I've had so many recommendations from people that I don't know who the hell they even are. Who the fuck are you? How do you know anything about me? So I don't, it's pretty much just my website and Facebook. That's where you find me online.
And if you don't find him that way, and if you are listening to this or watching this on YouTube or somewhere else, you can find us at www.facebook.com/authenticity show. And you will see a link to this episode and other mention of James Tsakalos. Also, if you're curious about learning about things related to personal growth, you can just type into Facebook groups, look for Learn About NLP and Hypnosis. So if you do that, you'll find my group. It's a warm, friendly group. We talk about a lot of good stuff, a lot of good links. James is in that group, so you can find him easily there. And this has been really fun. I've really enjoyed this. Really looking forward to having you here, James. It's always been great talking with you, and it's going to be even more fun in person, I'm sure. You're going to have lots of laughs.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you, Satch.
All right, thank
Cheers.
you.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest, James Tsakalos. If you'd like to keep in touch with James, you can find his website at nlpmelbourne.com.au, or you can find him on Facebook, and his last name is spelled Tsakalos. James will be in Orange County, California in September of 2018 for an 8-day intensive Spiral Somatics workshop. Check it out. This show is produced by Oliver Altine. That's me. Our theme music is composed by Oliver Altine. That's also me. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Android Market, Stitcher Radio, etc. Find us on YouTube, and check out our website, authenticityshow.com. Thank you for listening, and have an authentic day.